Okay, so yeah, since most of you are familiar with like the lab because you started, I'm just gonna like run through it really quickly. All this demo is, it just shows you how to build a class from scratch and how to like declare member variables and functions, and then how to define functions in like a source file, and then how to use those classes in like in the main file. Okay, so you guys can all see my screen, right? Just to make sure whoever's on Zoom. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, there's this dog class. We want to make a dog class and we want to give it some member variables and we want to declare some functions here, and then we want to define them in our source file. So to start, we're going to make a class. So to do that, we just do class dog. Okay. The data members, we're going to declare in a private specifier. So when you build a class and when you are like, when you're creating attributes of that class, you can make them either private or public. So there's a private keyword and there's a public keyword. So under the private keyword, we're going to have all of our member variables. So the member variables are just like the attributes of the class, right? So for example, for this dog class, its attributes are going to be like the dog breed, the dog name, the dog weight, and the dog's age. So if we run this example output, we can see what it's supposed to look like. You don't have this for labs, just for demos. There's these four. So we're going to make the private variables private because we don't want them to be accessed by like a user. So private means that whatever you make private can only be like edited or read by things inside the class. So for example, like other functions in the dog class, we'd be able to edit these, but not anything in main, for example. And we'll see how that works. So we're going to make four member variables. We're just declaring them. Okay, so we're going to do a string for the breed, string for the name, and then we're going to do a float for the weight and for the age, integer. And then under public, you have all your functions. And the reason why our functions are public is because we want the functions to be able to be used by the user. So we're not going to let them see like what the member variables are or read them, but they can interact with the functions. And that's like going to be what they're using to interact with the dog objects. So that's why these are all public. Okay. So to reiterate, private means only visible in the class, and public means you can access it anywhere. So this main class, if it includes Dog.h, then when we make a dog object here, um, we're always free to call these functions, but we're never free to like just like try to read these variables. That's not going to work. So we're going to declare four functions, and we're just going to declare them. We're not going to define them yet. The definitions are going to go in the source file, and I'll explain why it's important to have like a header file and a source file too later on. So the first one is the default constructor. So for constructors, there's no return type, right? So it's just going to be dog, and then empty parentheses, because these are default, which means that there's no arguments passed in. And this is just semicolon. And then parameterized means that we're going to be passing in the parameters from the beginning. So all the information of the object is already known. So in this case, it's not default. We're like telling the compiler what we want to build a dog object with. So it's going to be, we're going to tell the compiler like what we're going to initialize these to. Okay. So it'll be, the argument list here is just going to be each of these four members that we want to initialize. So it'll be a string for the breed, string for the name, for the weight, and in age. And again, when we define this, we're just going to be assigning each of our class variables to each of these parameters that are passed in, right? That's the whole point. And then the getter function, when you're working with classes, you usually need getter functions to access the member variables because we made these private, right? So since we made these private, we can't just, if we wanted to see like what the name of the dog was, we can just do like, if you had a dog object named D, right? So in main, if you make a dog object, like let's say dog D, you wouldn't be able to do like d.name, like cout.name or something like that, right? And the reason is because we made this private. So then How do you get the name of the dog? You make a public member function that the user can interact with. And the way you do that is you just have it under public, and then we have a function that just literally just like returns a name. That's all it's going to do. It's very simple. So it's just going to be here we need a return type. So it's going to return a string, and then it's going to be called. You can call it whatever you want. So I'll say get name, and then the void function here is going to be to display the dog. So if you see the example output, um, the ones to print these four things when we display. So that's what that function is going to be for. And it's going to be void. The reason why it's void, even though we're printing something, is because the function itself is going to do the printing for us. So in some cases, you're going to want to return a string because then in main, you'll print that string out. But if you have a function like what we're going to do here, where it like prints out for you, then there's nothing to be returned. It's just you call that function and then it'll do the printing, and then you don't need to return anything from there. And we'll see how that works in main. So this is all the header file looks like in terms of like a general framework. You have your class. Also make sure it's closed with a semicolon. But you have your class. You have under private, you have your member variables, and under public, you have all the member functions. And each of these will act on like particular dog instances. Um, so now we can go ahead and define these in our source file. So the first thing is a default constructor. When you're defining a function in your source file, make sure that you don't make a new class, like class dog, right? Because we're not making a new class here. We're just going like we're going back to those functions and we're telling like the compiler like what those functions are going to do. So what we're going to do is just going to do dog constructor and then open the function body. And right now, the compiler thinks that this dog function is a new function. It thinks we're making a new dog function, but we're not, right? We're actually going and defining the constructor from here. So how do we tell the compiler that we're not going to make a new function, but we're just going to define the one that we already made for the dog class? The way you do that is by doing this. You do the name of the class that you're like defining the function from, followed by two colons. And these two colons are called the scope resolution operator. So this is basically telling the compiler that we're scoping into the dog class. Okay, we're scoping into this class. And the function that we're defining is the dog constructor here, and not like a brand new dog function. Okay, that's pretty important. If you're ever defining functions in line, so if you decide to like have a class here and then you decide to just go ahead, if you decide to go ahead and define these functions here, then you could just do dog like this, because we're already inside the scope of the class. But when you're outside, you need that dog : to let the compiler know that you're going inside the class again. But yeah, this is another option in case you don't want to do this, but it's pretty trivial. And then we're going to define the parameterized constructor. So I'm going to write out all the function bodies first, and then we'll do each function one at a time. So it'll be dog : dog. And inside this, we're going to have our arguments for the parameterized constructor. So this is going to be each of those. We can copy it from here. So one important thing to note is that if you guys took prog 1, in Python, you're not allowed to have like multiple constructors, right? You can have one constructor, which doesn't do the initializations for you, but that's it. In C++, you can have multiple constructors because of function overloading. So you can have multiple constructors named dog, so long as they have like different parameters, right? Different parameter lists. Since this one is empty and this one has like 4 parameters, the compiler can differentiate between like different like function calls. So if you're going to make a default dog object, it'll use this one. And if you're to make a dog object where you pass in the variables, it'll use this one. Yeah. For the getter function, so here we have return types. So the way you do this is you have the return type first, which is a string, and then just a name, right? So dog get name. And then the void function is display. So we have, again, void, which is the return type, and then the name, which is display. And that follows the dog : Those are your general like definitions. And now you can actually define what the functions do. Okay. So in the first one, what we're going to do in the default constructor is just give default values. So if you were to make a dog object, and we don't like have any values to work with, we're just going to give default values because we need to initialize all of these, right? All of these, because that's what the goal of the constructor is. Um, so what we're going to do is we're going to set breed equal to some default value. We can use the ones here. So here it says generic dog, so we'll do generic dog. And same for the name. We'll do name equals snowball. Same for the other two. And again, when you're inside a function, the compiler knows that this breed that you're referring to is the class member variable called breed of the dog class, and not just some, other variable. The reason it knows that is because we scoped into the dog class using this, right? When we define the function, when we give the function header. So it knows that now we're talking about the class variables of the dog class. And then for the parameter constructor, you're gonna set each of these members to each of these incoming arguments. Okay. The way you do that is in Python, if you had a function like this, right, you would do like this dot breed equals breed, right? Something like that. In C++, it's the same, but instead of doing this dot, we're gonna do this arrow, and the arrow is just gonna be a hyphen followed by like this right angle bracket. Okay. The reason why this is different will be explained later. It's not important right now. But just remember that like when you're doing this, it's this arrow breed instead of this dot for like any member variable. So same thing with the other ones. Okay. And that's our permanence constructor. Again, all it's doing is just copying all the arguments over to the object, right? So we're just assigning all of these to the member variables. Get name. Remember, we just did get name so that we can like get what the name of the dog is, since it's private. So all it's doing is literally just returning the name of the dog. So we're just gonna do return name. And then to display this dog, we're gonna print out all these attributes in this format. So this default dog thing, this comes before. So we'll hardcode that in main. But for these four, we can just do um, cout. So yeah, in functions, you can do a lot of things with functions, right? In Python, it's like the same thing, but you can have them return stuff. You can have them like assign things like this constructor, or you can have them print things out to the console, which is what this display function is going to do. So you can do cout um, breed, then followed by the actual breed. Same thing with the name, and then with the weight, we're going to have lbs after, and then the age, followed by years. Okay, so yeah, so now we've gone ahead and we've defined all the functions that we declared in the header file, in our source file. So that was all that we needed to do in this. Okay. So now basically our entire class is set up and we can go ahead with using this class, making instances of this class in main, and then, calling functions if we need to. So do you guys have any questions so far about like how we made the class and everything? Because this is like the general framework for like making like any class. Okay, so now that we have a class, we can use it in main, right? So the first thing we need to do is declare default object. So if you have a class, then how do you make a default object? It's just like we did here. So the type is going to be dog, which is now a valid type because we made a class called dog. It's the same thing as doing like int and then naming it something, right? Now we can use dog as a type. And if you just declare like a dog object, let's say default dog, what it does here is it calls the default constructor automatically. Okay. So what this does is this is equivalent to doing dog default dog equals this. Okay, dog constructor. Because this returns a dog object that's defaultly constructed, right? Um, but you don't need to write this out. This is like a shortcut for that. So whenever you're declaring like an object and you want to call the default constructor to initialize the object, you can just follow this syntax. The name of the class followed by like the name of the variable. Okay. And then we're going to display the object. So we'll do default dog dot display. So again, here we're taking this dog and we're calling the display function on this default dog, which is a dog instance. Um, Next, we're going to declare two parameterized objects. So now instead of just doing like a default dog, we're going to make we're going to make two calls to this parameterized constructor, and we're going to pass in actual information. So um, we'll do dog1, and then here we pass in like the parameters in order. Okay, so the ordering is very important, just like in Python. When you have like a function and the arguments are ordered in a certain way, you have to make sure you follow that. So we have to pass in first the breed, the name, the weight, and then the age. So we can say like the breed is like German Shepherd or something. And then here it says the name of dog one is Max. So we'll say Max. And then for like a weight and an age, we can just do like, I don't know, 6 pounds. And then 8 years old. And for dog two, we'll use this information from the second dog. So we'll do dog two. And again, it's the breed first. So here the breed is Chihuahua. So Chihuahua, Molly for the name, 5.5 pounds, and then 10. Okay, so now we've made three dog objects. And notice how here, I use the same sort of idea here. You can append the parameters, like the parameter list in parentheses, to the end of the name, okay? So again, this is equivalent to doing dog1 equals dog parameter constructor. It's just another shortcut. So if it helps you understand what's happening, you can keep this, but just know that like this is also a valid way to call like the parameterized constructor to initialize an object with parameters. Okay. Um, to display the object's first name or the name of the first object, we're just going to do dog1 dot get name, which is a string, right? And then we want to print that string, so we'll do cout dog1 dot get name and L. And then to display the second parameterized object, we'll just call, display on the second one. So we'll do dog2 dot display. And again, notice here how for get name itself isn't printing. Get name just gives us a string. We have to print the string ourselves in main. So that's why we're doing cout here. But display, the display function prints it out for us. So we're not going to print out the display function, right? You would never do something like cout dog2 dot display. Okay, that's kind of nonsense because this prints it out for you. So you just need to call it and it'll print it out. But that should be everything. So now we can run this and see if it's the same. I'll also add some handles here. And then we can compile this and make sure it like runs. Oh, and then here we can just say, okay, but you get the idea. Yep. So again, this first display function printed out our default values because we passed in no parameters here. But the second one printed out these modified values because we made a parameterized constructor call.